I wonder if you find yourself here or know someone who does. You're a woman who loves Jesus. You want to live a life pleasing to him, but you're wrestling with same sex attraction. So, what do you do with that? Do you close your eyes and wish it away, or do you abandon yourself to what you feel because you think it's the only way to experience joy in life? Welcome to Sacred by Design. Kyle is with us today to talk about walking with Christ while same sex attracted. Kyle and I are both spiritual coaches here at Regeneration Ministries, and in this episode, Kyle is bringing us some of her story. So I'll let you begin the conversation today, and you start the story.
All right. So I spent 11 years involved in same-sex relationships. And if you were to ask me during that time, I would have told you it was great. Didn't think anything was wrong with it. Now, I was brought up in a Christian home. So Christianity wasn't foreign concept at all, right? I knew about Christianity, I knew about Jesus. I couldn't tell you that I had a personal relationship with him. But I thought he was okay with what I was doing. It was cool. And so, I walked through that, but there came a point at when, you still kind of go, gosh, there's this hole. There's still this place that's not filled. And I thought this relationship thing would do it,
Mm,
and it really didn't.
mm,
And what I ended up going is like, okay, there's something else that I still am longing for that this relationship is not filling. And so that's when I really then started to say, okay, well, let me really delve into what it means to be a real true life Christian.
mhm,
And that's when the Lord just started guiding me out of that. And I'm not saying that it was an overnight thing.
mhm.
This was a process. It was a process for me. The process was about 3 years.
Okay.
But the Lord certainly brought me to a place where I could understand his truth and I didn't feel condemned by it. It was like, I have something so much better for you. And life will be so much fuller for you. And I noticed there was a change in my heart in that.
Mhm.
And so then I had this thing of like, okay, I really want to follow Christ. And so then I just started jumping into what it means to just follow Christ every day, not tomorrow, not next week, not 5 years from now. But what does it mean just for me to follow Christ today?
In 2 minutes, you just handed all of us a precious, beautiful part of who you are. So thank you for that. And what I hear and what you're saying is, and what I love, is that you heard a calling, not a condemnation.
Hmm.
And I think that that is really important to bold, underline, highlight in this conversation.
Hmm.
That if you are wrestling with feelings of same sex attraction, that I hope that our listeners hear that,
Hmm.
that they hear a calling and not a condemnation in what we're sharing today and what we're walking through. So, if we could go into a little bit of the details of just even the transition, what did
Hmm.
that 3 year period for you? What does that look like to follow the calling and to not? What does it feel? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I think, it feels like, okay, here's this huge part of myself that I have to discard.
Mm-hmm.
And it was because I had attached my whole identity to being in same-sex relationships. So now there was this feeling of, oh my goodness, who am I? Who am I really? And what I really discovered is that um, how much sense does it actually make to attach your identity to your sexuality? And because I'm so much more than that. And so this the it was a feeling of being able to really figure out who I really was. And that meant even um, the differences in me and other women, right?
Mm-hmm.
I always tell people I am not the pumps and makeup chick.
Okay.
I always say that. That's just not who I am.
Yeah.
But what I realize is that's not what makes me a woman first and foremost. And so I really started to be able to feel good in my own skin. Like, and I didn't have to give off this other false persona that I was living in either. And so I was able to kind of go from an extreme of, oh, let me, shed as much of being a woman as I can by the way I look, the way I dress, the way I act. But let me just come into, okay, but who is Kyle really?
Mm.
And so I was able to be comfortable in the way I dressed, in the things that I was interested in. Like I love sports,
Mhm.
love being active. As a kid, I wasn't just playing with Barbie dolls, but I made my mother get me GI Joe to go with the Barbie,
Right.
right? So being able, just understanding that, like that's cool
Mhm.
to be who I am
Mhm.
and to know that who I am, I can still reflect Christ in an amazing way that nobody else can.
That nobody else can. And the idea of not being a stereotypical girl,
Mm-hmm.
I think even shedding that and putting that aside, like you said, there's a lot of diving into identity, and you're so detailed. We are each so detailed and
Mm-hmm.
so different that that's important work.
Yeah.
Important work. So, how did you connect with others in the Christian community?
So within the Christian community, that was a little bit difficult, but I had a friend, amazing lady who was always just calling me to be me. And
Mm.
she reflected Jesus in just this wonderful way. She was always interested in me and what I was doing in my life and how things were going with me. And I knew, like, she didn't keep it a secret that she was a follower of Christ. But she didn't come at you with guns blazing with it either, right?
Yeah.
But she just showed me the love of Jesus.
Mm.
And I think if I had probably encountered anyone else other than her, my experience might have been different.
Mhm.
Um, she didn't, again, there wasn't the condemnation, there wasn't the, oh, I can't believe you doing that kind of thing. But she just continued to just love me where I was
Mm.
and to call out the Christ in me.
Mm.
And so that way, I was able to feel a little more comfortable in Christian community. Every now and again, sometimes you run into the person who says the not so nice things, or they
Mhm.
think they're saying something helpful and they're really not.
Mhm.
But otherwise, um, my entry into really understanding what real Christian community was like was this good friend and I'm still friends with her today.
I love that. And no hidden agenda.
Right.
Just this
None was,
invitation.
yeah.
That's so powerful. And I love that you mentioned her, because I feel like that's what we try to do here as spiritual coaches,
Mhm.
is to come alongside and to call out, with no hidden agenda,
Exactly.
but what the special qualities are
Hmm.
that make up who you are.
Yeah, and how much the Lord is not trying to take that from you. I think so
Hmm.
many people think that, okay, I need to be changed in some way. There's something, whether it's outer or thought processes, there's parts of my personality, like, oh, I can't engage in this fun thing that I used to do, but that's not what God wants. I think we have to remember, those are gifts from God, right? If you were a person who just enjoyed kayaking, the Lord's not trying to not make you kayak anymore, right?
Right, right.
That's a gift that He's given you, something to engage in. And so I think it's just learning, what are these things that I thought were really a part of the being same-sex attracted identity, and
Mhm.
separating that from, no, like, what are the things that are just truly just me apart from that?
Mhm. That's a lot of work.
Yes. Yeah.
That's a lot of
Yeah.
work. So you work with women who struggle with same-sex attraction.
Hmm.
What are some of the common themes that you hear in conversations with them?
I think the first is shame.
Mm.
A lot of women feel like, being a Christian, this is like the most, horrible thing, sin that you can have. Uh, and so they're shrouded in shame with that. They are thinking that they'll never be able to be like the kind of Christian that they think they should be. And I think once they understand that, this isn't about this really isn't about your identity. This is more about what's happening in your heart, as opposed to taking what's happening in your heart and making an identity, right? This is really, it's an invitation from God to say, let's examine what's really happening in your heart. And so that's one of the things that a lot of women just struggle with, the shame around it. Like they don't feel safe. I think safety is another thing. They don't feel safe sharing that in a Christian community.
Now, you grew up in a Christian community.
Mhm.
Did you hear messages of shame or, danger or not being safe or threats?
Yeah, for me, I didn't, but I think that's just because of the era that I grew up in. I grew up at a time where there wasn't a lot of conversation around same-sex attraction like it is today. Like it wasn't, I was in one of those communities where you didn't even talk about it. Like nobody never heard the word homosexual or gay. I can remember one instance where my grandfather was dating a lady who had a son who was a cross-dresser. And that's the extent. And then there wasn't even anything that was said particularly about him. They just made the statement, this is what this guy does. And that was it. I never heard anybody say, don't do it, or, this is awful and, the Lord will condemn you. I never heard that. But so many women today, that's the message they're hearing. They're hearing that they're going to hell and the Lord is condemning them, and this is such an abomination to the Lord. Those are the kinds of words that they're hearing.
It's so interesting because the quiet and like avoiding the conversation creates so much shame, but then also our culture now is not quiet. It's very loud.
Yes.
And then there's these competing voices of shame, but also you be you. And what I love about I hope that the message that's coming across is that it's not fitting into the Christian woman mold. That's not what it is.
Exactly.
God doesn't have a mold. God made each of us so different, and we all can reflect Him so uniquely and beautifully.
Yes.
And so, what an invitation!
It is.
Not a forced. So I hope that that's the message that's coming across. I know that certainly that's what you're saying. This calling for more is we want it to be loud and really clear.
Yes.
So how are you able, through spiritual coaching, especially with these women who are coming in with same-sex attraction, how are you able to encourage them in their process of becoming whole?
Yeah. Well, I try to take the stigma away from the actual same-sex attraction, and ask a different question.
Okay.
And say, okay, let's think about what's really happening in your heart. Your heart is telling you something. The same-sex attraction is not just about being in a relationship with a woman. Your heart is saying, hey, there's a legitimate need that you have that has not been met. And so your heart is starting to seek, okay, how do I get that met? And so some of it is spending some time just even talking about family of origin stuff and relationships with mom, relationships with dad, and really just trying to take the stigma away from the actual same-sex attraction itself and say, let's see if we can go just a level deeper and really think about what your heart is telling you.
That transformation can probably feel hopeless. So how do you push past that hopelessness?
I think when a person can connect dots. So if I'm talking to a woman who maybe she really had a rough relationship with her mother, and I'm not going to say like abusive, maybe it just wasn't the kind of relationship that she wanted. That doesn't mean that she still didn't need that. Like God planted within her this need to connect in a healthy emotional way to her mother first, and then to other women. And so when you start to talk about, okay, what was that emotional connection like for you? Do you feel like you were seen and heard and loved first from your mom? And then typically we'll start to hear maybe some things, and people will again assume that it has to be something that's so super traumatic.
Mhm.
She had to be an alcoholic, or she had to be just this mean person. But the perfect example I like to give is that, okay, let's say your love language is um, physical touch,
Mhm.
but your mom was a words of affirmation person. Like, she may have told you all day long, like, you're great, you're awesome, you're wonderful, but God designed you to get some hugs.
Mm.
And then if you don't get your hugs as early as 4 years old, your brain is going to start to think that you're unlovable. And your brain doesn't have the capacity at that age to figure out, oh my goodness, like, my mom's love language is words of affirmation. And so she started giving me, like, you're just thinking, what's wrong with me?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so there's this thing that you need, the way God designed you to receive love, that you don't get. So you start to figure out, well, how am I going to get it?
Mhm.
And that process will happen over the course of time. And oftentimes, by the time, even maybe it could be before puberty, you notice that you have this stronger pull toward women, and you don't understand why. And in today's culture, that equals, oh, you must be gay. And so, oh, that must be why I feel this way. And so that's the kind of life I have to live. But the truth is, where your heart is saying, no, like, I need good, healthy connection with other women.
Mhm.
And there's nothing wrong with that.
That is so good. I love that. I love that so much. Yes, connecting the dots. Yeah, how can you do that when you're little?
You can't. You have no way you can do it.
Mm-mm. So say you're doing this work and you're trying to connect the dots and you're trying to understand your attraction and your desires and what God wants for you. What are some practical things that women who experience same-sex attraction, what can they do in the midst of their temptation?
Sure. Um, that people might think this is weird, but if you can start having a conversation with God
Okay.
and to actually say, you know what, Jesus, like, in this moment, I feel like being with a woman is what I need. And if I could, Lord, I would do that right now. Just being honest there. Uh, and Jesus loves that because he can do something with that. And so I think having being free enough just to invite the Lord into that.
Mhm.
And then I also just say, okay, what's going on for you that day? Did you not get enough sleep? Hey, maybe you missed the meal and you need to just get some food. Maybe it was a stressful day, or maybe you haven't had the opportunity to connect with some friends, or with people who really love you and are glad to be with you. And so your heart is like, yeah, like I'm missing something.
Mhm.
And so just really walking through just an inventory of what your day is like. And you know what? The other thing I have to say to women, like, you have to think about, how close are you to having your menstrual cycle?
Mhm.
Because as your progesterone and estrogen go up,
Mhm.
those feelings will probably go up as well.
Mhm.
And so even just checking something like that,
Mhm.
and then finding out, okay, what are the ways that you then can get your heart filled in, as a, getting away from either sexual fantasy or even trying to hook up with someone, instead of making that your kind of remedy.
Mhm.
Then maybe it's, you know what, I need to call some friends and
Mhm.
just see if they can hang out. Or it might be, you know what, I didn't eat lunch today. Let me just go eat. I need a meal. And then you may find that the temptation and the feelings of that are kind of less intense.
Mhm.
Not saying they're going to go completely away, but
Mhm.
they'll certainly be less intense.
Mhm. I, I I'll just say that never would I have thought that the first reflex to in the midst of temptation would be, "Hey God,"
Yeah.
but that would be really powerful.
Yeah. I remember the first time I said that to somebody, and she went, "You can't say that to Jesus." It was so good. But I was like, "Oh, yes, you can." Like, I was like, "You think you're hiding from him?" No, you're not.
Well, that's the thing is he's always near, and for us to reach out to him as we connect the dots is just an invitation for him to step in with us. And so beautiful. We've covered a lot today, but I think it's just like the kickoff for a lot of other conversations. So thank you for being here today and for sharing your story, part of your story,
Yeah.
because there's a lot more to Kyle
There's a lot more.
than these 12 minutes that we get today. But I really hope that just the encouragement that you offer, like what stewardship of that gift and your journey to be able to pass that on and share that with other women who might be struggling with same-sex attraction, to not listen to the shame, but to listen more for God calling them.
Yes, indeed.